When the humans first arrived at the Galactic Council, they came in ships that looked like flying garbage. Their vessels were built from old satellites, scrapped mining rigs, and broken space station parts. The other species, proud and advanced, watched the arrival with wide eyes and then burst into laughter. The council hall, known for its seriousness, echoed with mocking chuckles. The Andari diplomats whispered behind long robes, calling the human fleet a parade of junk. The Corlons, covered in bio-armor and born in lightspeed empires, asked if the humans had gotten lost from a scrapyard. Even the peaceful Irari, known for their silence, gave off waves of amusement through their energy fields. No one took the humans seriously. Earth was new, small, and had no history in intergalactic affairs. They expected humans to beg for technology, offer resources, or perhaps request protection. Instead, the humans stood tall in their patched-up uniforms, introduced themselves with calm voices, and made no apologies for the ships they flew. One human representative, an older woman named Commander Ella Voss, simply smiled when the laughter filled the air. She didn't look angry. She didn't argue. She only said, "We built what we could with what we had." The council found it even funnier. They called Earth a race of scavengers who had stumbled into space. They made jokes in their own languages, recorded songs mocking the Rust Runners of Sol, and refused to share even the simplest technology. After all, why give anything to a species that didn't understand real engineering? But what they didn't know was that humanity wasn't just a species of dreamers, they were survivors. For hundreds of years, humans had faced wars, disasters, and extinction. Their technology was not shiny, but it was smart. Every part had a story, every bolt had been repurposed, every engine had seen something die and live again. The humans were not ashamed of their scrap. They trusted it. They knew how it worked, how to fix it, how to use it in ways others couldn't. When the meeting ended, Earth was not given any position, any vote, or even any respect. But they had learned everything they needed. They had seen how the council worked, how the great species treated the weak, and how quickly laughter could replace caution. They left without protest. They returned to their sector, closed off communications, and got to work not on war, but on something greater. They started gathering every piece of discarded tech from old battlefields, dead stations, and broken satellites across the galaxy. Where others saw trash, they saw treasure. Where others moved forward, humans reached into the past and pulled out power. Within 10 years, their fleet doubled. Not in size, but in capability. The scrap was no longer simple metal. It became part of a system, a living network of weapons, sensors, and engines that worked together like muscle and bone. Alien pirates who tried to raid Earth colonies began to vanish. Mysterious ships, silent and ghost-like, were spotted salvaging destroyed fleets, fixing them mid-space, and leaving before anyone could trace them. Rumors began to spread in dark corners of the galaxy, in places the Council didn't look. Whispers of a race that had mastered the art of salvage warfare, who could rebuild a warship from a wreck in days and turn a mining drone into a bomber. The Council, still laughing, ignored the signs. To them, Earth was still the species that came in scrapships, asking to be seen. They had no idea what was really happening. Commander Ella Rovas had not forgotten the laughter. She had written the words down. She had framed the moment, not as an insult, but as a promise, that Earth would never again ask for respect. They would earn it, not by copying others, but by becoming something new, something unpredictable, something no one would see coming. And so, under the shadow of mockery, humanity forged a different path. Quiet, patient, dangerous. The galaxy had mocked their scrap. They would live to regret it had been 10 years since the Galactic Council laughed at humanity, dismissing them as nothing more than a race of scavengers, but in that time, things had changed. Earth was no longer the small, overlooked species they had once been. Behind the scenes, humanity had been building quietly, methodically taking the wreckage of old wars, derelict space stations, and abandoned colonies, and turning them into something far more powerful. They hadn't been fighting for dominance. They hadn't been seeking glory. They were simply preparing for the day when the galaxy would understand what Earth could do, when they would see the true strength of the humans who had learned to survive by any means necessary. Then, it came the day the galaxy realized. The HFY, a brutal and war-hungry species from the outer reaches of the galaxy, launched a massive invasion, sweeping across hundreds of peaceful worlds with the force of a tidal wave. The Federation scrambled, sending their most advanced fleets to hold the line, but nothing seemed to stop the HFY. Their warships were built for destruction, designed for fear, and they had the speed and power to crush everything in their path. Colonies fell, military bases burned, and the galaxy trembled in fear as the HFY's forces spread. First, the Federation tried to ignore Earth's growing power. The humans had always been on the outskirts, never part of the elite. They weren't seen as a serious threat, just a race of junk collectors with no real weapons. But as the HFY advanced, something strange happened. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, where the HFY had set up strongholds, whispers began to circulate. There were reports of mysterious, heavily modified ships attacking HFY convoys, disabling their advanced weapons, and disappearing into the vastness of space before reinforcements could arrive. The Federation dismissed these reports as mere rumors, but the truth was far more dangerous. One night, the Federation's most advanced fleet, the Aurelian Vanguard, a vessel that was considered nearly invincible, vanished without a trace while on a mission to strike at the heart of the HFY fleet. The only sign of its disappearance was a message that had been intercepted by a human ship, the Steel Dawn, as it passed through the empty space where the Vanguard had last been seen. The message was short, chilling. "We've lost the Vanguard. The enemy is not what we thought." That was all. No other ships had been in the area. No HFY ships were detected. Yet, the Vanguard was gone. Completely erased. The humans knew what had happened. They knew it wasn't the HFY who had taken down the Vanguard, it was them. The fleet that had once been ridiculed for its broken, mismatched ships had grown stronger, smarter. They had learned how to attack where the enemy least expected it, how to use the very technology they had once been mocked for, in ways the Federation's finest ships could not. They didn't need the sleek, flawless warships that the galaxy's elites relied on. They simply needed time and the element of surprise. In the shadows, humanity had crafted a new kind of warfare: stealth attacks, sudden strikes, and the ability to disappear just as quickly as they arrived. The Federation, struggling against the overwhelming power of the HFY, finally turned to Earth. They had no choice. Humanity had become the last hope. Commander Ilara Voss, now a general, stood before the newly assembled human fleet, a force made up of ships so battered and scarred that they barely resembled their original designs. But Ilara knew what they could do. She knew that these ships weren't just patched together, they were alive with ingenuity. They were built to survive, to outlast, and to strike when no one expected it. The humans didn't need to launch a full-scale war to win. They didn't need to send thousands of ships charging into battle. Instead, they offered the galaxy something far more dangerous: precision. The fleet that the galaxy had laughed at would now show them what real power looked like. The human ships moved like shadows, slipping through enemy lines unnoticed, striking critical points in the HFY fleet before vanishing without a trace. They disabled weapons, sabotaged key systems, and cut off supply lines. It wasn't about destroying the HFY, it was about crippling their ability to fight. Slowly, methodically, the humans dismantled the HFY war machine. The Federation, initially hesitant, now watched in awe as the humans turned the tide of the war. Entire HFY battalions were wiped out by small, nimble human ships using nothing more than scrap technology. The more they saw, the more they realized this was no fluke. Humanity had become the galaxy's most dangerous weapon because they understood the value of survival. They knew how to fight without the luxury of perfect ships and pristine technology. They knew how to make something work when everyone else had given up. They had turned the HFY's own strength against them, using their advanced ships' arrogance and overconfidence to defeat them. As the HFY began to retreat, and the Federation finally took back some of the lost colonies, the humans remained in the shadows, watching. They didn't celebrate. They didn't gloat. They had done what they came to do, and in doing so, they had forced the galaxy to finally see them for what they truly were: The once mocked species that lived on scraps had become the key to survival in a galaxy that had forgotten what it meant to fight for your life. The Federation's leaders, who had once laughed at Earth's junk fleet, now sat in the council hall in silence. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide of the war, and they had done it with the very scrap the galaxy had ridiculed. The galaxy's elite could no longer deny it. Earth was no longer the underdog, it was a force to be reckoned with. And the HFY, who had underestimated humanity from the very beginning, would never forget the lesson they had learned the hard way. Never mock a species that knows how to survive, because survival is the greatest weapon of all. The Battle of Broken Steel wasn't meant to happen. It was supposed to be just another minor skirmish in a galaxy caught in the wake of war. The humans had already made their mark on the battlefield. They had proven their worth, not with brute force, but with the power of strategy, innovation, and surprise. Their enemies, though wary, still underestimated them. But on the edge of the galaxy, in a forgotten sector known only as the Broken Steel, the war would take an unexpected turn, one that no one had seen coming. Broken Steel was a desolate region. It was home to ancient, abandoned space stations, ruined battleships, and wreckage from centuries of conflict. It was a graveyard for fleets lost to time and neglect. No one had dared venture there for years, except the few scavengers who risked everything to strip valuable technology from the forgotten ships. Yet, in the heart of Broken Steel, an enormous fleet began to form, a fleet that had not been there before. The humans, who had earned their reputation as masters of salvage warfare, had found something in the wreckage. They had found a massive armada of forgotten ships, all left behind by a long-dead empire. What had once been scrap was now a treasure trove of power. Commander Elara Voss had gathered her fleet, an eclectic mix of patched-up warships and scavenged tech, to investigate the strange buildup of activity. She knew something was off. For the past few weeks, communication had been intercepted between the HFY and another species, the Railer, an ancient race with technology far beyond anything the galaxy had seen. The humans were no strangers to being underestimated. The Railer weren't just hiding in the shadows. They were watching. They were waiting. And Elara was determined to find out why. As her fleet entered Broken Steel, the atmosphere was tense. The vast debris fields stretched across the stars, the wrecks of countless ships floating like silent witnesses to a forgotten war. The human fleet moved slowly, carefully. Their ships were a blend of old Earth technology and alien salvaged parts, and their captains had learned long ago that moving recklessly in places like this was a death sentence. The Federation ships, sleek and pristine, had often taken the same path, only to disappear without a trace. But the humans had learned. They didn't rush. They didn't make noise. They moved like shadows, blending into the wreckage, listening, waiting. It wasn't long before Elara's sensors picked up an anomaly. A massive object was drifting just outside the range of their usual radar scans. It was too large, too solid, to be a simple wreck. Elara knew at once this was it. The Railer had set a trap, and they had no idea the humans were already in position. A large battle was on the horizon, but it wouldn't unfold like anyone expected. The humans didn't need to fight a war of numbers. They only needed to fight smart. The Railer, who had been watching the humans approach, didn't realize the humans had already mapped the field. They had already identified the wrecks that held the strongest salvage, and they knew exactly where to strike. With a single command from Elara, the human fleet split into smaller groups, each one taking a different route through the wreckage. It was a gamble if the Railer caught on, but the humans knew how to play the game of risk. The moment had come. The first wave of human ships launched their surprise attack, hitting the Railer's rear flank, catching them off guard. It was a direct strike, and the Railer's first response was to counterattack with overwhelming force. The human ships, though heavily outgunned, had something the Railer didn't: agility. They could dart between the wrecks, using the debris fields as cover, while the Railer's massive warships struggled to track them in the dense field of scrap. Metal. The human ships were like ghosts, appearing and vanishing, while the Railer, in their arrogance, believed they could crush them easily. In the heart of the battle, Commander Voss and her flagship the Steel Dawn, led the charge. With a steady hand, she ordered her fleet to focus on the Railer's engines, their most vulnerable point. The Railer warships were powerful, but their fuel supply lines ran through a series of vulnerable conduits hidden beneath their shields. It was a risky move, but Alara knew that if they could disable their engines, they could cripple the entire Railer fleet. The moment the first Railer ship's engines went dark, the entire battle shifted. The once confident invaders began to panic. The humans were everywhere, striking from angles they hadn't predicted, using every piece of the battlefield to their advantage. Ships that were supposed to be invulnerable were now sitting ducks, stranded in space as their engines sputtered and died. The tide was turning. But even as victory seemed within reach, Alara knew better than to assume the battle was won. The Railer weren't known for backing down. They had other ships hidden deep within the broken steel, and she could feel their gaze upon her fleet watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back. It came sooner than expected. A new wave of Railer ships appeared from behind a massive chunk of debris, their weapons charged and their shields at full power. The battle wasn't over, but the humans, who had learned to fight with little, now had something to prove. They had learned how to take on opponents far stronger than themselves and win. Alara's ships didn't retreat. They didn't falter. They pressed forward, turning the very battlefield against the Railer. As their ships scattered and retreated, the humans pressed on, dismantling each Railer vessel one by one, knowing that every battle fought on their terms was a step closer to total victory. When the battle finally ended, the Railer were in full retreat. The once mighty fleet had been shattered. The human fleet, battered but victorious, stood tall amid the wreckage of broken steel. The humans had proven, once again, that it wasn't about numbers or fancy technology. It was about understanding the art of war, knowing how to strike at the heart of an enemy and use everything at your disposal to win. And the galaxy had seen it all. Commander Elara Voss looked out at the floating wreckage. The Railer might have underestimated the humans once, but they would never make that mistake again. The Battle of Broken Steel was a reminder. In this war, the humans would not just survive, they would dominate. The galaxy was filled with chaos. For centuries, powerful factions had fought for dominance, each trying to secure its place in the stars. But amidst the endless wars and shifting alliances, a new force was rising, one that no one had expected. It started small, like a whisper in the dark, but quickly grew into something much larger. The Iron Union was born. No one knew exactly when it started, but rumors began to spread. A group of highly skilled engineers and war strategists, all exiled from their own planets, began working together in secret. They weren't interested in power for the sake of power. They didn't care about being rulers or kings. What they wanted was something far greater: unity. They sought to create an empire that didn't rely on politics or bloodlines, but on strength, technology, and discipline. The Iron Union was their vision, a union built on the ideals of progress, hard work, and the belief that strength came from unity rather than division. The center of this movement was an enigmatic figure, Commander Eric Vorn. No one knew where he came from. Some believed he was once a high-ranking officer in the Galactic Federation, while others said he was a former mercenary who had crossed paths with the wrong people. What was certain, however, was that Eric was a master of tactics and diplomacy. He understood how to make people follow him, not with fear, but with respect. Under his leadership, the Iron Union began to take shape. The first major victory of the Union came when they hijacked a fleet of military-grade ships from an uncharted star system. The crew of those ships had been scavengers, looking for resources, but when the Iron Union showed up, they didn't know what hit them. Using a combination of cyber warfare and precise combat tactics, the Union swiftly took control of the fleet and began to refit the ships with advanced weaponry and defensive systems. It was a message to the galaxy. They were no longer small, and they weren't to be ignored. Word of the Iron Union's growing power spread quickly. Other factions who had once been rivals or enemies began to take notice. Some dismissed the Union as a mere group of outcasts, but others saw it as a threat that couldn't be ignored. The Galactic Federation, already stretched thin with ongoing wars and unrest, sent emissaries to negotiate with Eric. But Eric was not interested in diplomacy for the sake of peace. He wanted the Federation to recognize the Iron Union as a legitimate power, nothing less. The first meeting between the Federation and the Union was set to take place on a neutral space station in orbit around a dead star. It was an opportunity for both sides to come to the table and discuss terms. But what no one expected was that the Union had already infiltrated the station's security systems. As the Federation representatives arrived, they were greeted not by a peaceful meeting room, but by an army waiting in the shadows. The Union soldiers, known for their discipline and unmatched combat skills, took control of the station in minutes. The Federation was stunned. For the first time in years, they were at a disadvantage. Commander Eric Vorn stood before them, calm and collected, as if the battle had already been won. He demanded recognition, not as a faction, but as an equal capable of reshaping the galaxy. And when the Federation reluctantly agreed, they had no choice but to acknowledge the rise of the Iron Union. With this victory, the Union began to expand. Eric's tactics were unorthodox but effective. He did not wage war in the traditional sense. Instead, he used precision strikes, psychological warfare, and political manipulation. He understood that the true power of an empire didn't come from sheer numbers, but from the ability to control and manipulate situations to one's advantage. The Union's growing influence spread like wildfire. Planets once loyal to the Federation started to drift toward the Union, and even some mercenary groups, seeing an opportunity to profit, joined the ranks. But as the Union's power grew, so did the enemies it had made. The Railer, a powerful and ancient alien race, had watched from afar, and they did not like what they saw. The Union's rapid rise was a threat to their carefully maintained dominion over the galaxy's outer reaches. The Railer were not known for diplomacy, and they certainly didn't tolerate rivals. Their fleet, one of the most advanced in the galaxy, moved toward the Iron Union's territory, ready to crush them before they could become too powerful. Eric, however, was prepared. He had anticipated this move. The Union had already begun fortifying its strongholds, setting up traps, and building secret weapon caches. The battle for dominance was coming, but the Union was ready to fight on their terms. They would not make the mistake of facing the Railer head-on. Instead, they would fight using the very strategies that had made them so successful: subtlety, deception, and calculated strikes. The Railer fleet arrived at the edge of Union space, expecting an easy victory. But when they entered the system, they found nothing but silence. The Union fleet was nowhere to be seen. At first, they assumed it was a trick, that the Union was hiding in the debris fields, waiting to strike. But as hours turned into days, the tension grew. The Railer began to feel the weight of their mistake. They had underestimated the Union's power, and now they were walking into a trap. And then it came the first strike. A single Union ship, heavily armed and cloaked, appeared from the shadows. It hit the Railer's flagship with a barrage of concentrated energy blasts, disabling their shields in an instant. The rest of the Union fleet, hidden in the debris around them, followed suit, attacking from all sides. The Railer were caught completely off guard. They had walked into the Iron Union's trap, and now they were trapped in a war they couldn't win. The battle was intense, but the Union's tactics proved superior. The Railer, despite their advanced technology, couldn't keep up with the Union's speed and precision. One by one, their ships fell, crippled by devastating strikes. In the end, the Railer were forced to retreat. With the defeat of the Railer, the Iron Union had achieved something incredible. They had not only survived, they had risen. They were now a force to be reckoned with, a power in the galaxy that no one could ignore. The Federation, once dismissive, now saw them as equals. Other factions began to vie for the Union's favor, recognizing the value of aligning with such a powerful and clever force. But Commander Eric Vorn knew that this was just the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and there would always be new threats, new challenges. But with the Iron Union rising to power, one thing was clear: the future of the galaxy would no longer be determined by the old powers. The rise of the Iron. In the far reaches of the galaxy, where the stars were faint and the planets broken by centuries of war, there existed a place known only as the Throne of Rust and Stars. It was not a throne of gold or jewels, but one of ancient, weathered metal, standing tall on a forgotten world where no one had dared to set foot for millennia. This throne had witnessed countless battles, empires rising and falling, and it was said to hold a power greater than any ever known. But the legend was only whispered, passed from one ship's crew to another as a tale to frighten the unwary. Until, of course, the time came when the throne would call. Kara Alun, a skilled navigator and seasoned captain of the starship Elysian, had heard the stories all her life. She'd spent years traveling the galaxy, but never had she dared venture into the unknown sectors where the throne of rust and stars stood. It was said to be cursed, a place where the air was thick with the echoes of the past and where anyone who sought the throne would be doomed to madness or death. But as time went on, the whispers changed. They spoke not of death, but of power untold, unimaginable power. And Kara, ever the opportunist, knew that power meant survival in the galaxy's brutal, ever-changing landscape. It was an old warship's distress signal that led Kara to the forgotten world. Her crew had picked up the signal, a faint, broken message that repeated endlessly, as if something or someone was begging for help. The coordinates pointed toward the uncharted system where the throne stood, and despite every instinct telling her to turn back, Kara pressed forward. The lure of that power was too great, too tempting to ignore. As they entered the system, a thick cloud of dust and debris shrouded the planet in the distance. The world looked lifeless, its surface cracked and scarred from long-forgotten wars. The Elysian began its descent through the atmosphere, shaking with the force of re-entry. The crew exchanged nervous glances, but no one spoke. Everyone knew why they were here, and no one dared voice their doubts aloud. Landing on the planet's surface was harder than expected. The ship's systems fought against the gravity, the air, and the strange electromagnetic fields surrounding the area. Once they touched down, Kara and her crew suited up and ventured outside. The landscape was barren, but in the distance, a structure loomed tall and dark, as though it had been forged from the very bones of the world. The rusting remnants of metal twisted upward, a colossal monument to something lost to time. The path toward the throne was long, winding through fields of twisted metal and shattered remnants of ancient technology. There were no signs of life, no sounds of any creatures. The air was still, thick with the weight of forgotten history. Yet as Kara approached the throne, a strange unease settled in her chest. Something wasn't right. She could feel the weight of the throne's presence, as though it were watching them, waiting for them to come closer. The throne itself was enormous, towering over them like a monument to an ancient ruler. It was made of a dark, metallic substance that gleamed faintly in the dim light of the planet's distant sun. The intricate designs etched into its surface spoke of an advanced civilization, one that had long since crumbled into dust. Yet the throne seemed untouched by time, its form perfect, as though it had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Kara and her crew to arrive. Kara stepped forward, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. As she reached for the armrest, the air around them shifted, humming with an energy that was both alien and familiar. Suddenly, a voice echoed through her mind, low and resonant. It was not a voice she could hear, but one that vibrated within her thoughts. "Why have you come?" the voice asked, and Kara felt a chill wash over her. "We came for the power," Kara replied, her voice steady despite the rising fear in her chest. "The power to change the galaxy." The voice laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the throne. "You seek power, but do you understand what it costs?" The voice was not just in her mind anymore. It filled the air, pressing in on all sides. The throne does not offer its gifts freely. It demands sacrifice. Kara's crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The air crackled with energy, the ground beneath their feet trembling. It was as though the very planet had come alive in response to the throne's awakening. But Kara did not retreat. She had come this far, and she was determined to claim what was promised. Her fingers brushed against the throne's cold surface. The ground beneath them gave way. The crew screamed in surprise as they were pulled into the depths of the planet, their surroundings shifting rapidly. They fell through an endless void, the universe spinning around them like a whirlpool. Time seemed to. The air was thick with strange symbols and lights, flickering like stars. In the center of the space stood a figure, a being made of pure energy, its form constantly shifting. It was both male and female, ancient and young, its eyes glowing with the intensity of the cosmos. "You have awakened the throne of rust and stars," the figure spoke, its voice resonating in the air. "But now you must face the truth of what it offers. This throne is not a source of power. It is the embodiment of the galaxy's past. It is a reminder of everything that has been lost, everything that was sacrificed for the sake of survival." Kara looked around, her crew now standing beside her. They were no longer on the planet, but in a vast, endless space, surrounded by the remnants of 1,000 ancient civilizations. And in that moment, Kara realized what she had sought was not power, but the remnants of a dying galaxy, a galaxy that had consumed itself in endless wars. The figure before them raised a hand, and the stars in the sky shifted, revealing visions of the past of civilizations that had risen to power only to fall into ruin. They had all sought the same thing: control, power, and dominance. And each time, they had failed. "Do you still seek what you came for?" the figure asked, its voice soft but filled with ancient wisdom. Kara stood motionless, her mind racing. She had come seeking power, but now she understood. The throne did not offer the power of control, it offered the truth of the galaxy's endless cycle of destruction. She had been wrong to think she could conquer it. The true lesson of the throne was not in its power, but in the acceptance of what had been and what could never be changed. As the figure's form began to dissipate, Kara knew their journey was over. The throne of rust and stars had shown them the truth of the galaxy, and they would leave with a new understanding. The galaxy would always be broken, always be at war. But perhaps that was the way it was meant to be. With a final glance at the throne, Kara and her crew left the forgotten world behind. They had not gained the power they sought, but they had learned something far more valuable: the true cost of ambition and the weight of the past that could never be outrun.